Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Bill Lester. I'm with University of Florida IFAS Extension Service here in Hernando County, and welcome to today's class on managing forage for livestock. So the idea behind these classes, so you have 5 acres, is we get a lot of questions at our offices from people who have just moved to the area and they have 5 acres or 10 acres or maybe just 1 acre, and they would like to start a farm, or they like to start a nursery. They like to, raise bees and produce honey and make some extra money from it. They like to have horses or goats or any kind of livestock imaginable. We get all kinds of questions. So these classes are to help people out and give them the basics and kind of lay out the different things that you need to consider before you start raising livestock commercially. You start raising hay or trying to manage forage. So that's kind of the big idea behind these classes. Let me go ahead and turn this over to Laura Bennett. Laura is our multi-county livestock agent, and she knows a lot more about livestock and hay and forage than I do. So if you have specific questions about it, go ahead and save them for her. Like I said, if you can go ahead, if you have a question, click on the chat box at the very bottom and type your question in. And at the very end, we'll go ahead and get to that. So Laura, are you all good?
I think so. If my first slide doesn't advance, just let me know. So my name is Laura Bennett, and I am the multi-county livestock agent for Hernando, Pasco, and Sumter. And if you don't happen to be in one of those counties and you need to be connected with your livestock agent, please feel free to reach out to me and I will get you connected. And the purpose of my presentation today is to give you a broad look over about managing forage and give you some basic concepts that hopefully you can use to design a way to manage your property. And when you have small acreage, good management is even more important because you really don't have the space for error, if you will. So it's very important that you learn as much as you can about managing your property because it'll really help you in the long run. So this slide, I just wanted to go ahead and get my contact information up here for you. I have my phone number and my email address. You're welcome to jot it down. I'm going to have this slide up at the end of the presentation as well. So that you
all I see is the title slide still.
My slides are not advancing. I don't know what's going on with my slide.
You could try hitting enter on your keypad.
Well, I could. Nope. Let me try to X out of this and see if the other one will come up. I do not know why my slides are giving me such a fit. Okay, let me try this again. I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know what is going on with my.
It's the joys of technology.
Oh, I've never had my slides do this to me. Okay, let's see. Let's try share screen again. Okay. Is it advancing now?
It's advancing, but it's not filling the window on my computer.
See, I can't get this bar off the top. All right, I can't get the bar off the top from the I don't know how to do this.
If you go into slideshow, that should work. I can read the slides.
Okay, let me see if I can get it. It's not going to my second. Can you see my second slide now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I can't get the slideshow portion to work, so I'm just gonna have to do small slides.
Okay, if people want a PDF of the slideshow, can they email you for that?
Yes,
Okay.
I can do that. Yeah, I don't know. I've never had a trouble with my PowerPoint. I don't know what's going on with this thing. All right, so hopefully you can see my contact information. And so you're welcome to contact me, and I will have this slide at the end as well. Okay, so first thing we need to do when we're talking about forage is talk about the 3 classes of forage that we have. We have grass, we have forbs, and we have browse. And all of our livestock species have their preferences to the 3 in different ratios, if you will. And this is, to a certain extent, has to do with how their mouth parts are shaped, which is interesting, but also too, the type of ruminants that we have, because goats, sheep, and cattle are true ruminants, but our horses, they're we call them hind gut fermenters. So their needs for forage are very different, and they eat a lot of grass. And so that's also going to determine what forages you have available to them. So what we mostly have is it's going to be grass. And in Florida, Bahia grass is our predominant forage species that we have. And that has a lot to do with our soil type. It has a lot to do with being adapted to acidic soil. And also, it's very, very tolerant of grazing and heavy grazing, traffic, you name it. So this is going to be our main base forage you're going to find. The Bermudas, we find those more often used in hay production. You'll see coastal. Tifton 44 is most prevalent around our area. Those are grazable as well, but they don't persist necessarily as well as Bahia does in a constant grazing situation. Then we also have, for other grasses, we have ryegrass and other winter annuals that you can plant during the winter season to kind of extend your forage base, because our summer annuals, or perennials, I should say, summer perennials, they go dormant in the winter time for the most part, and are not real productive. So it's nice to supplement with something that's going to give you an extended grazing season. Now, our forbs would be our forages that you could just lump into as being broadleaf plants other than grasses. So, for example, perennial peanut, clover, sun hemp, ashenominy, these are all examples of forbs that we can plant either annually or perennially. Some of these are not necessarily going to be perennial. Like ashenominy sometimes comes back, but it's rated as an annual grass, or a legume, I should say. All of our legumes are going to fall into the forb category. Like I mentioned, the ashenominy. We have brassicas available to us, and also wildflowers and weeds. We wouldn't think of them necessarily as a forage plant, but they would also be our forb category. Now, browse, which is something that our goats particularly like, would be leaves that can be pulled off of twigs and woody plants or shrubs. Now, blackberry, our blackberry briars, pigweed, even Caesar weed can provide leaf to animals that prefer browse. And actually, it's interesting, there has been some research projects grazing goats on blackberry briars, and they actually do pretty well. So they can select those more nutritious portions of the plant. So when we look at all of our livestock species together, you can see the cattle, sheep, and goats, which are our true ruminants, are in that top layer, and then our horses are on that bottom circle diagram. So as you go across, you can see that cattle are going to eat more grass than the sheep and do the goats. And the goats are going to actually prefer, to some extent, that browse more so than cattle will. So, and it's an interesting dynamic because goats, they actually, if they had their choice, they would rather eat at about shoulder level. They don't prefer to eat with their heads all the way down to the grass layer. So this is just something that they have developed and have, I would say, goats have capitalized on this ability to eat a better diet based off of what's available to them. So mouth shape and also digestion play a role in what they choose. Horses are our biggest offenders of grass, and a lot of it has to do with that hind gut fermentation because they have to graze nearly 24 hours a day. And that's why it's so very important that they have something to eat in front of them, even when they're stalled. So this is something to be consider when you decide, hey, am I going to have horses on my property? If I am, they're going to consume a lot more forage than the cattle, sheep, and goats are going to consume per weight basis. So everything that is green or is not necessarily gold, if you want to say that, because we do have quite a plethora of poisonous plants in Florida. It's in general, animals are not going to eat poisonous plants if there is plenty of forage for them to eat. Now, I say that with a caveat because there are a few exceptions to this rule, and I'll talk to you about them in a minute. Also, don't panic too much because typically animals have to eat large quantities of poisonous plants for them to kill them, I should say. Now, if they eat small quantities over long periods of time, their health can be affected by it. It's not necessarily going to kill them, but they do, a lot of these components, they have to eat quite a bit of it. And I would say there's going to be exceptions to that as well. But in general, you're not going to have to be totally paranoid about what your animals are going to be eating. But there are some things you can do to provide protection for them. And we'll talk about that as well in weed management. Now, one of my suggestions to people always is to always scout your pastures. And what we mean by that is, especially in the fence line, that's where the weeds like to grow. Under the trees where the grass can't grow, that's where your weeds are going to pop up. So you always be inspecting new plants, plants you have out there. And if you stay diligent about checking for those things, you can stay ahead of any big problems. Also, keep in mind, new animals that you bring onto your property are likely to experiment with weeds that maybe your other animals have said, I'm staying away from. And case in point, a lot of these old orange groves that have been turned into pasture have lantana in them. And animals that have existed on that property for some time, they learn to avoid it and they will not mess with it. But if you bring some new animals in, they may experiment with eating that lantana just because they're not familiar with it and haven't acquired an aversion to it yet. So always be mindful of that when you bring new animals in your property. Young animals are likely to experiment with weeds too, so keep an eye for them. Weather conditions can affect palatability of weeds. So this weed, coffee senna, is a prime example of this. It can exist in your pasture all year long, and the animals will avoid it. It has an off taste to it, but there's something about when this plant gets very cold weather and has been frosted, the animals just get a taste for these beans, the bean pods that are on this plant, and they'll go around these plants and just consume all of those pods. And it's very deadly, and it can cause neurological problems, and most animals don't survive it. So this is one where it doesn't matter if you have plenty of forage, that frosted grass is now unpalatable to them. And now the bean pods on this one are palatable to them. So this is one you can't rely on just sheer volume of forage to keep them from eating this. Okay, let me see if I can get this to, it's not, okay. Okay, so one thing that you need to keep in mind as a livestock owner is that you must become a grass farmer. So soil fertility is going to be very important. You need to have that checked, and we're going to go over soil testing as well. Weed management, you need to have a very good weed management program. This can be mechanical or it can be chemical. And when I say mechanical, what I mean by that is you're going to, use a regimen of mowing your pasture to keep the weeds under control. And you can do a combination of mechanical and chemical, but mechanical, when you're going to use that method, you just want to stay above the height of your grass, and you're keeping that weed and the production of weed seed down. And what you're trying to combat there is you don't want weeds to shade out your grass. And so if you can keep that weed knocked back into a minimum, you can keep your grass healthy. So another technique that we're going to go over as well is rotational grazing, because rotational grazing allows you on a small piece of land or any piece of land to grow more grass, and therefore you can possibly bump up your stocking rate a little bit by having great grass production. So rotational grazing, by making your pastures into smaller plots, allows you to move animals from one place to the other and then let that grass rest in between grazing events. And you can keep weeds managed, you can keep grass height managed, so that you keep a high quality forage available to your animals for most of the year. So what affects forage quality? There's so many dynamics to what makes forage quality good or bad or in between. So we're going to talk about some of these aspects. Plant parts, the part of the plant they happen to eat, the age of the plant, the plant group, the soil type, because that's going to affect nutrition to the plant. Stocking rate is another big one, and we just talked a little bit about that. So we're going to look at each one of these and see how you can take these concepts into account to try to improve your stocking rate, forage quality, maybe forage coverage on your pastures. So plant parts in general, and this is pretty much straight up how it is. Leaf is going to be higher quality than stem. And this is a picture of Perennial Peanut, and it's a prime example. The leaf is very high quality, high protein, high digestibility. The stem, not so much. And so when hay producers put up Perennial Peanut for hay, they have to be extra careful, because as that plant dries before it's baled, the leaf tends to fall off and separate from the stem. And the more leaf that falls off, the lower quality the hay will become. The stem is still digestible, but it's not as digestible as that leaf. And so Perennial Peanut makes a great grazing forage if it's managed carefully, but the leaf is the best part of that plant. Plant age is also going to play into quality. And when we talk about age, we're generally speaking about the warm season grasses the most. Think Bahia grass, think think Bermuda grass hay, all those grasses are going to be higher and of highest quality in spring and early summer. And then also too, as that height of the grass increases, that the quality is going to go down because the taller grass is more mature. It's going to have more lignin in it, which is not digestible to the animals. And therefore, it's going to lower the digestibility of that grass. So if we can keep that height, or in terms of hay, we like to talk about regrowth after the cutting of hay, then you're going to keep your quality up. So this chart I took out of one of our University of Florida documents showing how weeks of regrowth after hay has been cut, how the crude protein, which is CP in this chart, and how the TDN both will go down. TDN stands for total digestible nutrients, and this is an estimation of energy that is available in the forage. And so as you see, you've cut the hay, 2 weeks later, that crude protein in TDN is pretty high, but every 2 weeks, it's going to drop off. And from 2 weeks to 10 weeks, you can see that crude protein is pretty much cut in half. And so if we can take that same concept of regrowth time from cutting hay and apply it to how we manage our grass in the pasture, then we can keep our grass quality high. So if we can graze it, let it rest for a time, and then let them go back and keep our grass below, and let's say we're talking about Bahia grass, keep that grass height below 8 inches, but no shorter than about 3. If we can keep it in that 3 to 8 inch window, we can keep our quality up. And so your management of your grass can impact the quality that the animals get to eat. Now that's a balancing act, because while very short grass would be very high quality, you can end up doing damage to your forage stands. So we've seen those pastures where it looks like you could go play putt-putt golf on them, and those are just way too short. And over time, if that pasture is kept that way, you can go out there and you will see the good forage is going to be gone. What's there is not actually the hay grass or forage that's managed for animal production. It's going to be weeds. So we don't want our grass too short, and we don't want it overly high. And so we got to keep it in a window. And the best window of height for Bahia grass is somewhere between 3 to 8 inches high. And keep it in mind in this way: if there's not enough leaf there for the Bahia grass, or even if it's a Bermuda, whatever grass you're growing, if there's not enough leaf there for it to properly go through the photosynthesis process and store its energy, it's going to reduce its root growth, and it's also going to reduce its ability to grow. And eventually you will lose your stand of forage, because it's just not going to keep up. It will kill out your forage. So we want to manage our forage so that it doesn't get too low. So let's talk about plant groups. I'll try to increase in that. So our plant groups, we have grasses, we have legumes, and then we have weeds. And our legumes in general are going to be a little bit higher quality than our grasses, because they fix their own nitrogen. So their crude protein is going to be higher, and they're going to tend to remain more digestible over time as well. So even some of our weeds, they can be very palatable and high quality when they're very young. But the problem with weeds are that they quickly surpass that little window of time where animals will actually eat them, and animals will avoid them pretty quickly. And smut grass is one of those examples. When smut grass is very young and immature, it's higher quality than the Bahia grass, but that window that the animals will actually eat it is very short, and they quickly will avoid it. It grows up tall, it gets mature, it's lower quality, and the animals will only eat the Bahia grass. But when it's immature, it's not bad. So all of our, let's see, our plant groups can be grazed to some extent if they're not poisonous, but they do have some palatability issues in the weed category, which is why they're called weeds. So let's talk a little bit about soil. Soil is, I guess you could say, the backbone of your forage production, because the forage has to use what's in that soil for its nutrition. So it's going to be very helpful to do a soil test. And even if you don't intend to or have no plans to fertilize, which a lot of people don't, it's helpful to know what the pH is of your soil, because if it is too acidic, you may need to add lime to bring that pH up, just so the plant can uptake the nutrients that it needs better. Now, sometimes if you find your soil is very, let's say, instead of being on the acidic side, which Bahia grass can tolerate, let's say you're getting closer to the, I've seen some soil tests come back way into the high sixes. Well, Bermudas prefer that pH much more than Bahia grass does. And so it might affect your forage selection. So knowing your pH of your soil is going to be very important. Any deficiencies can cause a loss of your forage stand. For example, if you were to apply nitrogen and did not put out potassium, and you didn't realize you had a low potassium level, you can actually kill a Bahia grass stand if it's not getting the potassium that it needs, because that nitrogen presence will pull all the potassium out as the plant is trying to use up what's there, and you can actually cause it to be way depleted. And I have seen some Bahia grass pastures suffer because of it. You might also want to consider tissue testing. And what that means is you're going to take a grass sample and send it in along with your soil sample, because what we're finding with Bahia grass is the root system is so deep on Bahia grass that it can pull phosphorus from way down underneath the soil top, and it can get what it needs in phosphorus quite easily. And as a matter of fact, in our area, I haven't seen any soil tests come back, for the most part, that even say they need phosphorus, because we have so much in that shallow soil level of most of our pastures around here. So tissue testing of the grass will confirm whether that plant is getting what it needs, especially as far as as phosphorus goes. And always keep in mind, you do not want to fertilize when the forage plants are dormant. And what we mean by that is fall and spring on summer perennial grasses. That is not in winter. Fall, spring, and winter, really, for that matter, are not the times to fertilize, because it's too cold and they're not growing. And so many times in spring, if we don't have moisture, those plants are drought stressed and they're not going to be growing, and the fertilizer is not going to be effective. It's best to wait till we've got some moisture and the plants are really growing well before you try to do any fertilizing. But always do a soil test, because that's where you really need to start. So when we talk about starting with our soil, that's going to be the basis of your forage success. So how often should you test? It's suggested every 2 to 3 years. That way you can find out, especially important to find out what your pH is, because that's going to be your basis for building off of that fertilizer recommendation. So right now, I would say it'd be an excellent time to test, because you can get your results back. If you need to lime your pasture, you would want to do that now, because it's going to take several months before that soil pH is going to be fully adjusted from that lime application. And you don't want to fertilize until your pH has been adjusted, because the plant will better be able to absorb what nutrients you put out there for it. So soil test now. If you don't have to adjust pH, then you wait until the summer to do your fertilizer application. If you find out you do need to adjust your pH, you would want to go ahead and lime now, and then later in the summer or later into late spring, early summer, you can do your fertilizer application if you choose to do that. So what macronutrients are we looking at? The things that our grasses need: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, as I said, you may not need phosphorus for your grass because a lot of our soils and our grasses access that phosphorus, and we may not need that. Potassium is the one thing that's really important to look at, because that one, if it's low, you do not want to apply any nitrogen unless you have that potassium to go along with it, because you can do some damage. But the soil test results that you get back from the University of Florida will tell you and give you instructions about how to go about applying and what to apply, how much of it to apply. And that's very useful, and it's a simple $10 test. And I will give you information about getting that soil test form and instructions at the end of the presentation. So how do you do the soil sampling? It's not too difficult. I'm going to give you the cliff notes, I guess you'd say right now. I do have a document on soil testing for pasture that can give you some more detail. But basically what you want to do, there are soil probes that you can use, and that's what's in the top right-hand corner in that picture. But I typically will use a shovel. You can use a garden trowel. Even post hole diggers, you could use those as well. But what you want to do is zigzag across your property and take about 10 samples, and you're going to put them in a bucket and go about 4 to 6 inches deep. You're going to, once you've gotten your 10 samples in that bucket, you're going to pull out and mix it up and pull out only about a cup of the soil that you have in there, because what you're going to generate is an average of your soil from your pasture, and that's going to be what you send into the lab. Now, if you have some areas, if you're on a small acreage, you're probably just going to do an average of your pasture, because you're going to buy fertilizer if you decide to, or if you're going to lime, you're going to lime based off of what the average is for your pasture. If you have some trouble spots, let's say some areas that just don't grow grass, you might want to send that sample in separate, because you can find out, well, the reason why this area is growing so poorly is the pH is way off. And then you could do something different in that spot and not do that for the entire pasture as a whole. You don't want to sample, try to avoid under trees. Don't avoid like a burn pile area, because that's going to really distort your soil results. Our areas under the trees, with leaf drop, it's going to typically be more acidic under those areas. This is why the grass doesn't like to grow in that shade, and also the acidic soil that can be there. And that's why the weeds typically pop up in those shady spots. So don't do anything that's kind of an outlier area. You want to just do your main pasture area that the cattle or whatever livestock you have are going to be in. So stocking rate, this is the $1 million question that I get all the time. How many animals can I put on my property? And I tell you, I could tell one person one thing, and across the street, it could be totally different. Our soil, our sandy soil is so, let's see, how would you say this? We don't have a lot of stored up organic matter and nutrients in our soil. So it's very tough to grow grass in our state, if you can say, but we do have great weather for growing our tropical grasses, but it is very difficult to make that stocking rate determination. And I will say it's a lot of, I'm going to say, experimentation and trial by error. It's one of the most important factors that you're going to have to explore to make your forage growing a success. And my rule of thumb always is, please understock at first. Even if you think you can hold 10 animals, put 5, because it's so much easier to add animals to your grazing situation than it is to try to remove them, because people get attached to them or whatever it might be. And for that matter, if you've overstocked, you're going to be doing damage, and it takes you may not notice it right off the bat. So I always say understock first, and then you can add later. And livestock need choice, and research has shown that cattle can graze a diet that's up to 50% higher quality than what is available to them as a whole on the pasture. But they have to have plenty of grass to choose from in order to do that. So you want them to have choice. You don't want to force them to eat weeds that they shouldn't eat. So always remember, understocking is always the best way to go. And you can increase your stocking rate with rotational grazing. And we're going to talk about that next here pretty shortly, because this is a tool that people on small acreage can really capitalize on. So this is an explanation of animal units. And sometimes you'll hear people talk about, well, this land can hold 5 animal units, or it can hold 2, or it can hold 6. Well, the baseline animal unit, and I've got the blue arrow beside it there. A baseline animal unit is a 1,000-pound cow, which that is not a real large frame cow. It's a moderately sized cow. That's one animal unit, and everything goes up or down from there. And as you can see, let's say you're going to put 3 or 4 cows on your property, and if you add a bull because you want to have offspring, if you see that he makes up almost 2, he's at 1.7 animal units. He's almost 2 cows for what he is going to consume and use on your property. So this is where a management technique, a decision you might make is, I'm going to have instead of having 4 cows, I can put 6 cows, but I'm going to artificially inseminate my cows and not have the bull, because he's going to take up a lot of space if you look at it from that perspective. And they're also sometimes they can be such a nuisance, not to mention. So if we look at sheep, and hair sheep are what we're going to want in Florida, because they don't get as hot as the wool sheep. Sheep and goats, they take up much less space. So you can get eight hair sheep make an animal unit, and 7 goats make an animal unit. So, and we tend to err on the side of about 6 goats or sheep for a cow. So you can have more animals. Now you're not, it's all relative too, because a cow is going to produce more meat or milk compared to a goat or a sheep. But it's also you need to decide handling, predator control, things like that are going to make life easier for you. And that's really a whole nother topic, I guess. But there's so many things that go into your decisions on what you're going to choose to put on your property. But just know that you have to take in consideration the animal size is going to determine how much forage they're going to eat. So our stocking rate, the general rule is, if you have 1 cow, you can exchange 6 mature goats for that 1 cow, or sheep for that matter. Your stocking rate is going to depend on what forage is present. Do you have a good stand of grass? Do you have legumes mixed in? What the forages are going to drive how much you can put on your property. Are there a lot of weeds? Because that's going to displace forage, your good forage that's present. Amount of trees. Our animals need shade. That's a given. We all need shade, but too much of a good thing can really hinder your grass production. If you find you're on a property that has a lot of oak trees, you're gonna fight with growing grass, because the shade is just going to keep it to a minimum. A lot of people, if you go up in that tree canopy and thin it out really well, you can grow some excellent grass under the trees, but you have to get sunlight to that grass for it to grow. All right, the dryness and really wetness of your property is going to determine how well your stocking rate is going to be. Some of our grasses prefer dry. Sun hemp, the Bermuda grasses can tolerate dry. The Bahia to some extent can tolerate dry, but wet areas, the Ashenominy, the limpo grass, that likes those areas. So depending on how wet or dry you are is going to determine, how well you're going to grow forage. Are you going to rotationally graze? If you decide to do that, you can definitely bump up your stocking rate. How much are you willing to feed? So the biggest critical air time for us is usually winter time, because especially through here, frost freezes, they really, decimate what you have to provide for your animals. So how much hay are you willing to feed? Are you going to supplement with feed as well? Because all those things are going to determine how much pressure you're going to put on your grass. Our soil type. Okay, are you real sandy, or do you happen to have a place that's got some clay that's going to hold a little bit of water? All these things. How much organic matter? What is the organic matter layer in the top of your soil? That's going to determine how much moisture your soil is going to hold for that grass and get you through some of the tough times when we're real dry. So there's so many things that you're gonna have to experiment a little bit with your stocking rate to determine exactly how well your property is going to hold livestock. So looking at rotational grazing, this is a diagram that shows manure distribution on small paddocks when cattle are daily rotated. So they're in for a day and then they move 24 hours later. And so this is a very, most people that rotationally graze will not daily rotate, but this is an example of how it affects manure distribution, because the animals are not going to congregate and they're not going to have loafing areas created that are going to just accumulate manure in one spot. It's going to be dispersed around, which is great for the grass because it's going to disperse those nutrients they take in. It's going to disperse them right back around on the pasture. So that's a good thing. Your forage quality is going to increase because if you're rotating, you're managing that forage height and that grow back that we mentioned in that previous slide. And so you can keep that in that sweet spot and keep that forage that is as optimal as possible. And also your forage quantity is going to increase because as you give those pastures a rest time, they can recuperate and come back and they'll be more prolific. And so that's going to help your forage to be more productive. And I will mention this is actually this diagram of the rotational grazing came from the North Florida Research and Education Center, some studies that they did up there. So let's look at rotational grazing a little bit. This diagram is actually designed for horses. This can apply to any livestock you might have, especially on small acreage. So the area that's in brown, they have a water trough back there in the corner, but that's really, we call that the holding pasture, or we would call it maybe the sacrifice lot. So they always have access to this particular area. And yes, it may turn into dirt before it's over with, but for horses especially, they're gonna create that dirt lot probably just because of just their activity on the forage. But basically what they've done is they've made 6 paddocks, and maybe it's each day they go to each one and you rotate through, and it gives that pasture an area to rest. And what you might also do is put, if you need to, on certain times of the year, you could put hay in that holding lot, and that way that's where they get supplemented for their forage. And remember, and the ideal would be to let that grass grow up to about 8 inches. You may not make it depending on time of year, but you want to try to keep it from getting too short after they've grazed or in between grazing. You want to try to keep it kind of as high as you possibly can. Now horses, they're a special lot because they do eat and need to eat many hours in the day, and that it has to do with their digestive system. And that's why they do that. So this is another example of a sacrifice lot. They're feeding them hay here. Yes, they've lost all the grass that was in that lot, but it's protecting the other paddocks from having that same thing happen to them. So they stay here. When they're here, they eat hay, they go out and graze, and they come back to this home base, if you will. And so that is one management tool that will spare most of your property from being full of weeds and losing your grass stand, is to go ahead and have that sacrifice lot for them. So balancing forage with the demand, forage demand with the forage supply is the game you kind of have to play. So when forage is low, you need to supplement. Or ideally, and this is very hard to do, but if you could add and remove animals. So let's say during the summer when grass is growing like crazy, you have more animals put into your system. And then in the fall, when the grass starts to slow down, you take some animals off. But that's hard to do because, you know, if you're set up, you may not be set up to get rid of animals or have them come and go like that. That's more difficult to do than, it's easier said than done, I would say. But what you can do is plan your heavy need around availability. So for example, in Florida, a lot of the ranches, they'll plan the breeding season of their cattle so that when they're calving and they're providing, they're lactating and providing milk to their calves, they'll have them give birth in the spring or very early spring, so that those nutritional needs of the cows are being met when the grass is of highest quality and most plentiful. And then they sell the calves as fall is starting, before the grass slows down too much. And so if you can plan your animals, especially if you have a breeding season with your animals, and plan around when your forage is going to be best, then that's a management technique that you can have. Also, it's very important that you plan for disaster because droughts can occur. Springtime, typically for us, is a very dry time of year. We've had some winter rain this year, which has been nice. But it's we're probably gonna dry up for a month or two now, and it can be kind of dicey as to whether you're going to have enough forage production. You have to watch that. Hurricanes, flooding, that can affect our forage production, and also extreme cold. When the weather is very cold, the animals, their metabolism increases, and so they need more nutrition to keep them warm. So sometimes in extreme cold, I've seen cows, you know, if you've got so many cows eating a bale of hay, a round roll of hay in a week, they may eat 2 in a week when it gets very cold. So that's something you kind of have to be prepared for. A lot of people come into a situation where they bought property, or maybe it's been just kind of abused for a while, and they say, I need to reseed, I want to replant. And let me say, let's always make this be our last choice, because it is very, very difficult to do, especially if you already have animals on your property. Because if you reseed Bahia grass, you really shouldn't graze it for 6 months. And so if you're planting, if you're preparing that soil, you herbicide, you disc, you plant in the summer, you're not going to graze it. And then by the time 6 months comes up, it's winter time, it's dormant anyway. And then by the time you get back around to where you can graze it again, it's nearly a 12-month ordeal. So this should always be your last resort, because you need water, so you can't plant till summer. You need warm temperature for the seed to germinate. You have to be have a very diligent fertilization plan with it. And then you're going to have some serious weed management behind it. A lot of herbicides can't be put on baby Bahia grass plants, so that's going to be difficult. It is an ordeal. And I had one of our seed producers in the area say, if you can step from one clump of Bahia grass to another, don't reseed, just let it do its thing. Because he said, Bahia grass is a marathon runner. It's not a sprinter. And it will fill in, and it will, if you'll let it seed up and grow and rest the pasture, it will take care of coming back in. But it's going to take time. It will not do it as quickly as throwing ryegrass out there. You always see it sprout up and it's beautiful in no time flat. But you just have to be patient and try to work with what you have, because it's very, very difficult to replant. And ideally, you keep animals off of it, I would say, for a year, because it's very, very hard to do that with animals on the pasture. So, in summary, for your forage growing success, evaluate your soil and see what you have. Don't overstock your pasture, because that is the worst thing you can do to it, because then you're trying to recuperate something that's very hard to do with that many with animals on it. Grazing management is going to be key. If you can rotationally graze, that's going to be wonderful. If you can manage your weeds to keep them from shading out your Bahia grass, that's going to be another key step. So good management is going to be your key to success. And I would not reseed unless it just absolutely has to be done, because it is a long process, and it's quite expensive. If you can get your grass recovered without doing that, you're going to be so much better, so much way ahead. Okay, so let me tell you about some resources I have available to you. I've got a plethora of things in my computer that I look at all the time and use, and I'm happy to send any of it to you. Now, let me say, I've got this Poisonous Pasture Plants of Florida. It's a poster, and I have posters if you would like one. And it actually, on the bottom of the poster, it'll give you some herbicide recommendations specifically good for each of the plants. So if you, let's say you find you've got a terrible problem with the coffee senna, it's going to tell you which herbicides work best on that. And so I can send you a PDF version of this poster, and you can look at it and see the recommendations on there. I do have the posters, and I can make sure I get some to the Hernando office as well, because I don't know that I have any over there right now, but I have extras. So if that's something you want, you can pick them up in at my office in Dade City, or I can get some to the Hernando office. I also have the Weed Management Guide for Pastures and Rangeland. Wonderful document. It talks a lot about how to herbicide your pastures. It tells you which herbicides work best for which weed. And this is not just, this is going to include poisonous or non-poisonous weeds. It's not just, it's going to include as many as possible. And so it's a wonderful document. I refer to it all the time. And then I've also got some that are on management of Bahia grass, management of Bermuda grass, whatever you might have. And I've got I've also got one that's it's called Pasture for Horses. It talks about things that do well for raising horses, because they can be difficult and hard on pasture. But you are welcome to email me for any of those things, and I'll be happy to send them to you. So let me see if I can get this up here. So once again, this is my phone number and also my email address, and you are welcome to contact either of those. Ask me questions, say, hey, do you have anything? Send me on this, because I can send you, I've got quite a little collection going. So I probably, I might be able to answer your questions with something that I have already handy in my toolbox. So, but that's, I know that's a 10,000 foot view of forage management, but hopefully, the concepts will help you to be able to kind of make a game plan for what you want to do with your pastures. And two, if you decide to, I know rotationally grazing can be difficult just because of putting up extra fence, but there are people that, you can put up electric fence, and they make a electric netting for even for goats and sheep. and you can move that around as you move them through and make paddocks with that. And that can be a much more inexpensive way to cordon off your property so that you can intensively graze portions and then let them rest. So that's just an option to keep in mind as well. But so, Bill, I don't know if you have any questions that you needed me to answer.
Yes, ma'am. We have a few questions here, not a whole lot. So if you guys have any other questions, go ahead and click on the chat box down at the bottom of your screen and type them in. Christine asked, what are some Florida-friendly plants that will help replenish potassium in the soil?
Most of our forage plants are going to use potassium, and actually, you know, I think, and potassium is one of those nice ones that it's usually put out. They call it potash when you go to order the fertilizer. So it's not, potassium is not a harmful one, and it's not. I haven't priced it recently, but usually, if your soil is low, you can put it out, and you won't have to do it again very often, because it's not going to be something you have to keep applying and applying and applying usually.
Yeah, I don't know if any specific, I mean, there are plants in the bean family that if you grow them, they're going to add nitrogen to the soil.
Right.
But there's no plants that I know of that add potassium. But potassium is not a nutrient of concern.
Right.
We're mostly concerned about nitrogen getting into groundwater and surface water, and phosphorus.
Right.
Because both of them will cause algae outbreaks, and they add and contribute to red tide and a lot of other problems. Potassium is not a pollutant in the environment. Brooke says, incredibly informative and helpful. Thank you so much. I have 10 acres of dormant orange grove I am hoping to move to in a year. Are there things I could do now to help prepare for my 2 horses and 2 mini donkeys? And dormant means that it has been untouched for 10 years. 90% of the trees are dead. Remaining trees have gone sour.
Well, first thing I would do, I'd get a soil test done, because you go ahead and get that done. B, I would start scouting for weeds, because there's a good chance you may have lantana. And another one that's really common in the orange groves is guinea grass. And guinea grass is a nuisance to hay producers, but actually livestock love it when it's immature. And so it'll probably disappear as soon as you put livestock on the property. So it's delicious to them. But you know, you just want to watch for the poisonous weeds. And then also too, if you can, and you're welcome to send me pictures, take me some pictures of what grass is there, because what we need to do is determine, is there grass there already that could be used for the livestock, or is this something that needs to be totally renovated before you put animals on there? Because a lot of times some stuff, you know, you may already have some behead grass growing in there, or if there's not much growing, you may need to go ahead and get prepared to plant. A lot of people will turn old orange groves into hay fields because they're usually high and dry, and the Bermuda grasses love it. So it'd probably be helpful to just find out what grass you do have and see if that's something you're going to work with or you're going to get rid of.
She added that it is covered in Caesar weed and passion vine.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I can't stand that Caesar weed. Yeah, that Caesar weed is a pill, and it probably is going to need to be herbicided to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's a tough invasive to get rid of.
Oh, yeah.
And Donna asks, where are you located in Dade City?
I'm at the fair. Well, if you know where the fairgrounds are, our extension office is on the kind of the south end of the fairgrounds on Highway 52.
And if you look online, it's the Pasco County Extension office.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how do you get rid of nettles?
Are you talking about like the fireweed? in the wintertime,
I'm
fireweed?
not sure. She'll have to, Donna, if you want to elaborate on that, whether it's fireweed or what kind of nettles it is.
And you can,
Heidi, oh, Heidi
okay.
says, thank you very much. I'm looking at land and just getting some info to be aware of. She is in Lee County. Please email the slides to her, and I'll write down her email before we log off here. Or Heidi, if you just email Laura,
Yeah.
her email is still on the screen right there. And I'm sure Laura will send you a PDF of the slides.
And two, any weeds that people have they can't identify, um, like especially like that nettle question, you can send me pictures and I can get it identified if I can't do it, and then we can come up with the correct herbicide to kill it, because that's half the battle with the weeds is getting the right identification to find the most effective herbicide. And with the fireweed, if it and fireweed's one of those that's a crazy example. It'll disappear for the summer and we'll be back in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
I hate that stuff. It's
She said,
terrible.
if you touch it, it stings, and
Yes.
cows do not eat it.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what's crazy? If you were to round up it or herbicide it, once it's dead, the cows love it. I don't know why. It's crazy. But yeah, it's terrible. And but it will disappear once our warm weather heats up.
And we have a question from Heidi. What about getting rid of torpedo grass? And torpedo grass is a tough one. I know I get that question from homeowners.
Yeah, is that now? I don't think is that in the crabgrass family, or are we talking about like shoot,
Torpedo grass is an
guinea?
invasive weed, and it's a grass, and it runs long and deep, and the roots go very deep into the ground. That's why it's torpedo grass. Um, that would be a glyphosate
Yeah, the problem
kind
with
of
the
issue.
grasses is it's hard to kill a grass in a grass.
Yes.
Um, and I don't know that that one would be. We have some like what we use to kill smut grass. We found it to be effective in killing some other grasses, but I don't know that if it's got those runners, it may be too hard to maybe very hard to kill.
Yeah, I know in a homeowner situation or in a lawn or flower bed, it's very, very difficult to control. So Heidi, if you want to email Laura, I'm sure she could look it up, because managing these things in a pasture is totally different from managing them in a lawn.
Yeah, and that's why where if you can ever spot spray just that plant with the glyphosate, you're going to have more success than trying to broadcast something that would isolate it out, because there's not going to be much that's going to isolate it out. But I could ask our weed specialist if Velpar could be used on it. But he would be able to tell me if it would be effective or not, but it's kind of expensive and very difficult to do.
And Red Kimball asks, is there any grass seed for livestock that grows well in Florida sand? We don't have any soil, and amending would be too costly at the moment.
Well, the best grass seed for Florida is the short answer is Bahia grass of some kind, because it can tolerate that low fertility and it can tolerate this now. But if it's very, very sandy, it's going to be difficult, because it's not going to hold the moisture to get that seed to germinate very well. So it's going to be extra critical that you plant during the rainy season. And some of our the vegetatively planted plant materials, like our Bermudas, do well in the sand, but it's a vegetative planting and it's more difficult to do. So that makes it kind of hard. But I would always try the Bahia grass, because it's going to be your best bet.
Okay, we have one last question here. Heidi asks, does red clover work as a cover crop in Florida? I am from Wisconsin and it is a good nitrogen fixer.
Yeah, we typically for our, now it'll be a winter. It's going to be a winter planting, and we like to mix, say, ryegrass with the clover if it's and you got to get it inoculated well to do it, because the clover will come up a little bit later than the ryegrass and it kind of extends your growing season a little bit. So we have I have a document that they put out every year that says these are the winter annual or winter legumes or winter plantings that are suggested by University of Florida. And what they do is they'll test some of the latest varieties to come out. They'll tell you what areas they grow in well. And it'll give you some specific clovers that are best adapted to Florida. And so shoot me an email and I can get that to you. And then, you know, there'll be something you can look at for planting next year, because in our area up here, most people plant their winter annuals right around Thanksgiving weekend. And so that way we get a little bit of moisture, hopefully, and get them to come up and manage them that way. But yes, there are some clovers that are recommended for Florida.
Okay, well, that's all the questions I see. So, Laura, thank you very much. I thought that was great. I learned a lot. I always do with your presentations because, like I said, this isn't my area of expertise, really.
Well, thanks. Sorry, my slides did goofed up. I don't know what in the world.
That's okay. Like I said at the very beginning, if you would like a PDF copy of the slides, just go ahead and email Laura. If you would like me to email you a link of the video recording once we get it completed and up, which will probably take until beginning of next week, and Red is asking that question, go ahead and email me, and my email is wlester@ufl.edu, and I will email you back a link to the video of this class as soon as we get it done and up. And that way you can watch it as many times as you like, over and over. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again soon. Just keep following us on Facebook for all of our upcoming classes.